were talking about the short-term choices, and it was clear that if you look at the economics of the renewable versus the economics of the traditional, which is the nuclear versus the hydrocarbon-based natural gas or coal, the traditional, conventional still looks good. But, which is a transactional approach. And by the way, I did mention that we will be very tough and be prepared for raising tough questions. I may become unpopular. But the question is, when we think from the point of view of the Eastern philosophy, the point I underscored was harmony with nature. In that spirit, how do you see the extractive processes like taking hydrocarbon out of nature and throwing carbon dioxide in the nature, or nuclear, which has got radioactive elements? And John has been saying he's been walking nuclear for the last 30 years. I was about to say maybe he has become radioactive in the process. How do you make the choices, particularly when you take a very humanistic approach of relationship between man and nature?
Okay. We got it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Complicated problem. I think the way I would look at this is this. When we talk about a new capitalism, you talked very eloquently in your presentation about the information overload that we're now getting. And it's unfortunate that as we learn certain things, we are unlearning other things. And what some of you are talking about, the new capitalism, is in fact the old capitalism. One of the things I've noticed in my discussions with my students and around the campus is that we use the word sustainability, and we almost use it as a synonym for planned, predictable outcomes. Because there's a tendency to believe that unplanned, unpredictable is unsustainable. So it leads people in a direction to say that the right thing to do is to look at all of the economic issues, including the externalities involved, and for government to make decisions in concert with corporations and with investors. Now, I think this is the wrong thing to do. To me, the way to achieve the synthesis that you're talking about is to put corporations far more at the mercy of the public than they have tended to be recently. We have made it in the United States and in Europe too easy, not only for large corporations, but for venture capitalists, to go to the government and say, I don't want to risk my money. I'd like you to assure my profitability. What do I need to do? Do you want me to build a big solar plant called Cylindra? Happy to do it. Guarantee my profitability, and I'll say anything that you want me to say about renewable energy. And big corporations are just as susceptible to this temptation as anybody else. As a matter of fact, you can often make the case, big corporations are sometimes the least capitalistic institution that we have. We would be better off if governments were to price externalities correctly and then stay out of the investment process. Now, we've been talking a lot about carbon. It's my personal view that we have no way of pricing that externality. But there are other externalities that we can certainly price. And air quality we can price, we can do all these things. And to let the society organically develop solutions. It's my guess, and I've told my students this many times, that perhaps not over my lifetime, but over their lifetime, there are going to be revolutions in the way we produce and consume energy that are at least as fundamental as electricity or the automobile. But those are not going to be generated by some government corporate partnership. If we had government corporate partnerships in the 1860s, we would now have low friction wagons and low manure horses. Because people would have thought about improving the existing paradigm. Okay? The new paradigms are not generated that way, they're generated organically. And I think we need to tell both corporations and venture capitalists, we are going to set a clear set of rules regarding pricing of externalities. Don't come to us to reduce the level of competition, to finance you at the taxpayer's expense, or to guarantee your profitability. If we can remember that that's how we've come up in the past, we're going to face a future that's highly uncertain. It's going to be a bumpy, risky, unpleasant ride, but it is the way to get to where we want to go. Just a person.
Let me sort of build on the point Bruce made, which is very important, that for us to make a fundamental change, it has to come from private initiatives like Steve Jobs' of the world, Thomas Edison's, Andrew Carnegie's of the world, which leads to a very important question based on Bruce on what you had to discuss when we were talking about Japan. Because you're talking about some fundamental changes that Japanese society would need in terms of dealing with aging society, debt, nuclear crisis. Then you also talked about being able to import skilled foreign workers. Now, when we're talking about what Bruce is saying, the need for private initiative. Now, in Japan, to promote that concept of private initiative so that we could have the future Moritas of the world, so Akio Morita, for example, or Matsushita, Soichiro Honda, what do you think Japan should do? Because what you propose is obviously government-led, all the 4 points. But if you have to promote the concept what Bruce is talking about, is it possible in Japanese society?
As an economist, I tend to talk about government policy to, like give incentives to private agencies to do something that we think is good. And so, of course, it's very important to appeal to
Private enterprise.
Private
Innovation.
Innovation. Well, anyway. And so one thing, for example, in Japan, young people so I teach, undergraduate students, and they, in my school at least, want to get a job in a big company, and so they don't think about it. Most people don't think about creating, being an entrepreneur to create a firm, and that is quite different from the U.S. And part of the reason is that, maybe society's values are different, but at the same time, we don't have a very good venture capital, and also we don't have the higher educational system that is compatible to MIT or Stanford. So we should change. So the universities should change to let students, study harder and more creative, so that they are ready to go. Actually, almost immediately after the graduation, they can be good entrepreneurs if environment is good. So I think the government can do something. To create those environments for young people, and that is very important.
Mm-hmm. Now that leads to a very important question for you, Shinori-san. Being one of the leaders of Hitachi, and Hitachi is obviously a product of a very, very innovative period in Japan, particularly what Hitachi achieved in the 50s and 60s. I had the privilege to study Hitachi, by the way, as a management consultant when I was at McKinsey. And I was very impressed with a series of technology Hitachi developed, particularly in a period between 1950 to 1970. But unfortunately, and again I said the questions would be a bit rough and tough, over the last 20, 30 years, in general, Japanese corporations have slowed down in terms of their innovative power. And in view of what Bruce is talking about, the role of the private enterprise for innovation, versus what Furusawa talked